D&D number 2, Suffer the Children in Jesus' Name, Chapter 8. Stayed awake most of the night, imagining life together with Caroline and trying to decide just what words he would use to go about popping the question. He watched as the gray of early dawn played across Caroline's face and she began to stir. She was indeed an early riser. She must have thought he was sleeping when she rose and tiptoed into the bathroom, for she softly closed the door as if trying not to wake him. Inside the bathroom, Caroline gripped the edge of the sink. What had begun as a slight pain had grown considerably during the night, kneading her abdomen. She wondered briefly about appendicitis. Which side was it supposed to hurt? Dismissing the thought, she took a deep breath and pushed her concerns away. She'd lived with pain before. Hopefully, whatever the problem is will clear up by itself. She freshened and crept back to bed. "Hey, darling," Toby crooned softly. "Hey," she smiled. "I love the way you say that." He pulled her close. "Come here and give me a proper morning kiss," he ordered. She obeyed. He brushed his lips back and forth over hers. It was several moments before he raised his head. "I can't seem to get enough," he complained. "I keep thinking, just one more kiss, just one more. But it's never enough. I want you so much." "I want you too, Toby. I want you to love me." "I do love you." In the quiet, she sighed. "I feel like I did all those years ago when you took me out on Molly and told me goodbye. I dreaded leaving. It was so wonderful here, like heaven on earth, and just like back then, I wish I didn't ever have to leave." "You don't have to leave, Caroline. Not ever." "I wish that was true." He stroked her arm. "Well, back when I was 14, I was powerless to keep you here. But we're grown now, Caroline, and I have the power." She rose up to look at him. "What are you saying, Toby?" "Stay with me, Caroline. Stay here with me. What I'm trying to say, Caroline, is, well, will you—" Well. Their heads jerked up at the intruder who stood in the doorway to the bedroom. "What the hell, Tracy? What are you doing here?" "So this must be the little slut you dumped me for." At the gasping sound, Toby glanced over at Caroline. Her eyes were wide, her mouth open, her fists balled in the sheet. "Well, she's not much to look at, is she, Toby darling? So very, what do you call it, plain? Get out of here, Tracy." But Tracy was apparently in no mood to take orders. She turned her attention to Caroline. "You look surprised, honey." "What? Didn't Toby tell you about me?" Toby watched as Caroline turned slowly to look at him, then back to the intruder. "Tracy, I'm not playing around. Get out of here. You want to talk? Fine, we'll talk. But not here. And now get out." He swung his legs over the side of the bed. Tracy ignored him. "I can see he didn't. Well, let me do the honors. Up to a few days ago, Toby and I were engaged to be married." Caroline's indrawn breath told Toby her reaction to that piece of news. "Tracy, I'm warning you," Toby threatened. "At least have the decency to allow us to get up and get dressed." "So, get up. It's not like I haven't seen it 100 times already." A soft moan had Toby glancing in Caroline's direction again. Trembling and pale, her chest heaved as she tried to take in air. "What's the matter?" Tracy addressed Caroline. "Are you shocked?" "Don't be, honey. He's a womanizer, one of the best. Let me guess. Did he take you swimming down at the swimming hole?" Toby sprang from the bed. "Damn it, Tracy, what are you trying to pull? I never—" "And I bet he fed you strawberries," she continued. Toby pulled his jeans on and turned towards Caroline. "I never took—" But she wasn't listening. She was trying to get out from under the covers, and finally standing, she turned toward the bathroom. Toby had never taken Tracy swimming, nor fed her strawberries, but he knew where she'd gotten her information. Brett had done his job well. Toby realized from the look on Caroline's face that he could deny it till the cows come home. She would never believe him, never again. Caroline moved toward the bathroom, but stopped by the door. He charged Tracy, but she was not intimidated and stood her ground. He grabbed her by the elbow. "Get out of here, Tracy," he ordered sternly. "I'm not sure what you think you're going to accomplish, but it's not going to work." She wrenched her arm free. I'm just trying to protect what's mine, so before you do something you'll regret, you might want to know. I'm pregnant. Silence. The house was utterly soundless. Toby could hear only Caroline's breathing. He'd been careful, he was always careful, yet he suddenly realized there are indeed consequences of not living in the way God had set forth. Still, he knew it couldn't be his child. Whose child is it? He asked snidely. It's not mine. I'm guessing it could be any number of guys. There was a reverberating crack as she hauled back and slapped him with all her might. They turned at the sound of a wrenching sob, and Caroline slipped into the bathroom, turning the lock with a resounding click. Toby lunged, grabbing Tracy and dragging her out of the room and down the stairs. Caroline could hear Tracy screaming obscenities and Toby's heated return. She covered her ears. She couldn't stand it. The confrontation, the violence. She doubled over. The pain. She couldn't decipher whether it was the old pain in her abdomen or the new pain in her heart. Grabbing the sink to steady herself, she tried to think, but her mind wouldn't work. She had to get out and away. She had to breathe. Her mother had warned her about men many times. Hadn't she beat it into her? Caroline hadn't listened, though. She hadn't wanted to believe the things her mother had so graphically articulated. This can't be happening. Toby lied to me. Not Toby. I've got to get out of here, she whispered. I have to go now. She ran to her room and dressed. She was moving around the room, haphazardly gathering what she could and leaving what she couldn't. She stumbled back to Toby's room. Toby's keys lay on the dresser. It wouldn't be theft, she thought. She would leave it at the airport. While Toby and Tracy fought and yelled at one another about who did who wrong, she stole stealthily out the back door, jumped in Toby's SUV, and drove away. At the airport, she found a payphone and called Toby. He answered immediately. Where are you, Caroline? I'm at the airport. I have to go. Your car is... No, baby, please wait. Don't hang up. Your car is in all-day parking, space number 31. Keys are under the mat. I don't care about the car, he yelled. Then softer. Sorry, I'm not yelling at you. Caroline, please, you have to believe that this is all a misunderstanding. Caroline could hear Tracy's laughter in the background. Please, Princess, don't leave me. It can all be explained. His voice was thick with emotion, and Caroline had to steel herself against its pull. I love you, Caroline. Don't do this. Her entire body trembling, she quietly replaced the receiver. He had to choke back the tears. He would not give Tracy the satisfaction of seeing how badly she'd hurt him. He turned to her. I ought to break your scrawny neck, and I'm not promising I won't lose control and do just that. He moved toward her. She backed away. Don't you dare touch me, Tobias Smith. Not if someone paid me, he shot back. Get out of my house and off my land. Toby, you're not thinking clearly. You're throwing away a fortune. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in a long time, and I don't need your damn money. Of course you do. You can never have too much money. He ignored her statement. You know, I tried to tell myself I was doing a good thing, helping you out. I thought, I don't know what I thought, but I was lying to you and myself. I didn't love you, Tracy, and you knew that. I did, however, care for you. How could I not see what you really are? Even when I found Caroline, I felt bad that I hurt you, and I wanted to be honest with you because I felt you deserved more than a farce of a marriage. But now, he stopped and shook his head. Now what, Toby? You can't blame me for trying to hold on to you. You can't blame me for fighting for the only good thing that ever happened to me. Oh, I can blame you, Tracy. You barge in here spewing your lies. I don't care what happens to you now. I'm sure you'll be fine. You'll find some other chump willing to marry you so that you don't have to lift one of your manicured fingers to help yourself. You deserve everything you get. You owe me. I owe you nothing. Grabbing her by the arm, he ushered her out forcefully. Out on the porch, she pulled away from him. Are you forgetting about your child? Slowly, he ran a hand through his hair. I don't know whose child it is or if there even is a child. What I do know is it's not mine. She turned and stormed away, and he watched her go. Once she was completely out of sight, he went inside, moving silently up the stairs and into his bedroom. Caroline was everywhere. She left her hairbrush, a pair of shorts, a sock, her scent. He sank down onto the bed and laid back, covered his face with his arm. How could he have made such a mess of everything? His parents and siblings had been dead set against him marrying Tracy. His mother had wanted to know where she'd gone wrong to make him not believe in love. He told her he did believe in love, for everyone else, just not for him. He'd been through so many relationships, he thought there wasn't anyone out there for him. He realized that's because he'd been ruined. He'd never found anyone who could compare to Caroline. Well, he certainly wasn't going to come this far and let it end this way. He would go to New York and win her back or die trying. If only he hadn't been so prideful. If he'd only listened to his parents. Honor your father and mother. He'd been taught that. He'd been taught many things, things he hadn't purposely shoved aside, but things he'd allowed to quietly slip away. And if he hadn't had sex with Caroline, then maybe she would have believed him when he said he didn't make a baby with Tracy. But Caroline knew he was weak. He'd made a conscious decision to do it, and there were indeed consequences. Next scene. Caroline pulled into the rest stop and rushed to the restroom. She hadn't been able to bring herself to fly again, not without Toby. She'd used some of her gambling winnings to rent a car, and now she was having trouble staying awake. What's more, the constant motion of the car was wreaking havoc on her system. It seemed as though as soon as she relieved her bladder, she had to go again. And then there was the pain that had started small but was now occupying much of her attention. That was okay, though, because the suffering matched her mood and she welcomed it. What should have taken her a day and a half at most to drive ended up lasting 3 torturous days. Torturous in both body and spirit. As she drove, she went over everything in her mind again and again. Her mother had been right. You can't trust men. No, no, she didn't want her mother to be right. What she wanted was to go back in time to the long talks and the passionate kisses and sweet ignorance of a few days ago. He'd seemed so real. How could it all be a lie? She arrived in New York in the early morning hours and turned in the rental car at the airport and took the subway the rest of the way home. Desperately needing the comfort of her friend, she headed straight for the diner. Rosie hugged her fiercely. "Where have you been? We've been so worried about you." Caroline's brow wrinkled. "What are you talking about? I wasn't even due back for another few days. I'm early." Eugene came out of the kitchen to hug her. "I was going to file a missing persons report today if you didn't show," he exclaimed. "I don't understand. I told you I wouldn't be back until Monday or Tuesday. It's only Friday." Before Eugene had a chance to speak, the answer came through the door. The bells rang softly as the door shut behind him. Toby stood at the threshold. "Thank God you're okay." Caroline whirled around, the situation becoming clear. He'd beaten her there, spoken to her friends. She frowned and spun back to Eugene. "I don't want to talk to him. I don't want to see him." Her eyes asked Eugene where his loyalties lie. He didn't disappoint her. Grimacing apologetically, he shrugged at Toby. Toby opened his mouth to plead his case, but stopped. After all, he'd already explained to them what had transpired. He thought that they would help him try to explain things to her, but apparently that's not how it was going to be. Frustrated, he ran his hand through his hair, started forward, but Eugene stepped in front of him. Toby's eyes met his. Sighing, Toby turned and walked silently out of the diner. Caroline watched him go. He looked terrible. Obviously, shaving had not been a priority, and nor had wardrobe, she thought, eyeing the rumpled clothing. There was no time for contemplating Toby's condition. The pain was there again, consuming her every waking thought. Breathing hard to control it, she told Rosie and Eugene she wasn't feeling well and would be at her apartment, resting. Next scene. For several days, Toby shadowed Caroline, following her around like some lost puppy. He rented a car so he would have a place to sit while she was inside her apartment. He sent her flowers. He wrote her long letters of explanation. Nothing worked. He cornered her one evening as she crossed the street from the diner, headed home. "Did you get the letter?" he asked, as he reached for her arm to stop her progression. She pulled back. If you're talking about the envelope addressed to me, it's in the trash. You didn't read it? What will it take to make you see? I want nothing to do with you, Tobias Smith. She drew a deep breath. This pain, it wasn't just in her abdomen anymore. It was covering her body, front, back, even her legs had begun to ache. Caroline, you can't just throw everything we had away because some girl you don't even know tells you a bunch of lies. I can if she turned and bent over, bracing her hands on her knees. Toby stepped forward. What's the matter? Are you sick? She breathed deeply. It's nothing. Nothing. Now leave me alone. Eyes narrowed, Toby studied her. Perspiration ran down her face, which seemed swollen. Her hands trembled. Her complexion appeared pasty white. He reached out and touched her face. Good Lord, Caroline, you're burning up. She pushed him away. Don't touch me. Don't you ever touch me again. She ran. Once she was in her apartment, she let the pain take over. It had moved. It was now more in her back than in her abdomen. She knew she was ill. She hoped it would get better on its own, but it wasn't happening. It wasn't going away. She fell into bed, praying sleep would come and ease the misery in her body and in her heart. Notwithstanding, the next morning, both were back. Caroline considered not going into work, but she knew they would all come to check on her, and she just wanted to be left alone. Better to work her shift and get out of there. Somehow she would get through the day, and maybe after work she would go to the clinic for those who couldn't afford to see a doctor. At the diner, Toby strode in, determined to see her. Caroline immediately called for Eugene, who came lumbering out of the kitchen. Toby held his hand up to stop his progress. Okay, man, you want to take me on? Fine. If we gotta go before I can say what I need to say, then let's do it. Though, if you care for her like you say you do, you'll let me talk to her. Just let me speak to her. Afterward, if she still wants me to go, then fine. I'll go. I'll go and you won't see me again. Eugene stood a moment considering Toby's words, the words of an honorable man willing to fight for his woman. He backed off. Toby turned to where Caroline stood by the counter, her knuckles white, her breath labored. The explanation he'd been planning slipped from his brain at the sight of her. Look, you're not well, and I'm taking you to a doctor, like it or not. I'm not going anywhere with you. Listen to me, he shouted. When her eyebrows rose at him, he decided the explanation may have to come first. Look, I met Tracy almost a year ago. Tracy made herself out like the Cinderella of the family, poor little misunderstood girl, treated like the unwanted stepdaughter. She made me think she was good and honest and unloved by her family. I think I wanted to see that. We had a relationship, and my parents objected to that relationship, but I wouldn't listen. After all, I'm a grown man. How dare anyone try to tell me what's best for me, right? Wrong. Even Jeff said I was crazy. Maybe I was. I never really asked her to marry me. It was more like an arrangement, just to help her out. She wanted me to marry her and save her from the wicked family. You see, I have this weakness. I can't stand for people to suffer, and I was so stupid. I couldn't see what she was. I agreed to marry her. That was 6 months ago. From the moment I agreed, she changed. She became the shrew she really was. She hated my band members, hated my lifestyle, hated my home, and hated my parents. She made life hell, and I don't think I would have actually gone through with it even if you hadn't shown up. But you did, and I realized, Caroline, that I couldn't ever marry Tracy because I loved you. I always had. That's it. It sounds idiotic, I know. And other than being an idiot, what did I do that is so wrong that you won't even speak to me? She put her hands up to her face and shook her head. I don't know. I can't think right now. I don't want to hear any more. He grabbed her hands and pulled them down. Please, Caroline, you have to. If you don't, you'll throw away something that is extraordinarily special. Do you think this kind of love happens to just anyone? It's been unique from the very first day we met, from the day you broke a glass in the kitchen. She stilled, and he jumped right in while he had the chance. I spoke to Tracy immediately after I found you because I thought it best to be honest with her. How is that a bad thing? We broke it off. I told her it wasn't fair for her to marry a man who was in love with another woman. What else was I supposed to do? Was I supposed to forget about you and marry her? Nothing good would have ever come of that. And I felt bad for her at first. Not anymore. She showed her true colors. She's deceitful and conniving, and she was lying, Caroline. I never took her swimming, and I never fed her strawberries. Well, then how did she know? Caroline cried. It was Brett. I thought I heard something that morning down by the creek. It had to be him. He was spying on us, getting her any bit of information that would help her cause damage to our relationship. That's crazy, she panted. Exactly, he agreed. Toby moved toward her, but she backed away. No. Then why didn't you tell me about her? Why did you keep her a secret? He slammed his hands down on the counter. I wasn't keeping her a secret. I would have eventually gotten around to talking about her. But she wasn't priority. We were discovering ourselves. There wasn't enough time to talk about everything. And then the Stillwaters came and we had to handle that. And the next morning, just before Tracy interrupted, I was about to ask you to marry me. I think you know that. But how could you do that, Toby? How could you ask me to marry you when we'd only been together a few weeks? As far as I was concerned, we'd been together 15 years. She shook her head madly. She couldn't think straight. The pain, if the pain would just ease up, maybe she could put together a reasonable thought. Caroline, think back to all the conversations we had. I couldn't have made all that stuff up. Those are the words and actions of a man who loves you with every fiber of his being. You have to believe that. I don't know what to believe. He raised his hands in frustration. Why? I don't know, she cried. And then softer, I don't know. My mom, she said she loved me too, just after she hit me. And my father said he loved me just before he left us. People lie all the time. Toby began to understand and his frustration disappeared. She wasn't being unreasonable. The abuse she'd suffered as a kid was making it difficult for her to believe in love. She'd started to believe with him, but it was a rickety tower and Tracy had neatly toppled it. Nodding his understanding, he reached toward her. I get it, Caroline. I understand. Still, I want you to think about how different our love is than what you've experienced in your life. Think. I don't know what to think. Right now, I can't think at all. She held her hands to her head, moaning. Toby stepped forward, concerned. Caroline, you're ill. Let me take you to a doctor. She looked up at him, then over at Eugene and Rosie and Irene and Alice. Their faces all showed concern and kindness. They also were blurring together. The room spun. She doubled over and cried out. New scene. They had been waiting in the small room for over an hour. Eugene stood against one wall, Toby the other. Madame Pierre was there along with Rosie. Finally, a nurse emerged from the double doors. Miss Jones has been taken to ICU. Which of you is her immediate family? I am her mother, Madame Pierre lied without batting an eye. And I'm her father, Eugene added, making the lie seem less plausible since Eugene was much younger than Madame. The nurse raised her eyebrows. Well, I am actually her grandmother. Her mother's dead, and I am the only mother she knows, Madame clarified. The nurse turned to Toby. And you, I suppose, are her brother. And you, she turned to Rosie, her sister? How'd you guess? Rosie answered sweetly. Okay, follow me. The nurse led them to a small waiting area just outside a glass-encased room where Caroline lay hooked up to tubes and wires. Her eyes closed, she appeared to be resting comfortably. Toby pressed his forehead against the glass. He needed to touch her. He needed to make sure she was okay. He turned abruptly. What's wrong with her? He asked the nurse. The doctor will be out shortly to speak with you. Shortly turned out to be another 30 minutes. The doctor, a no-nonsense kind of guy, spoke abruptly. She has a severe kidney infection. It's a good thing you got her in. She was close to renal failure. Apparently, it started as a bladder infection, which she ignored. It progressed and moved up into her kidneys. Toby turned and watched Caroline as the doctor went on to tell what the treatment would be and how long she would be in the hospital. He watched the nurse adjust the IV and check her vitals. How does someone get a bladder infection? Toby asked without turning around. Well, in this particular case, it's probably from recent sexual activities. We call it bride syndrome. Toby whirled. Bride syndrome? Yes. When a woman first loses her virginity, she's not used to the increased activity in that area. It's not uncommon for a minor bladder infection to occur. Virginity? Rosie blurted. Caroline was a virgin? Toby glared at her and then turned to peer through the glass again. So, he'd done this to her. His mind went over the love they'd made. They'd been swimming in a creek, made love on a horse. He shook his head. He deserved to be punished for his immoral behavior. He knew better. But not her. She didn't deserve this. He's caused her so much pain. He glanced back up at the glass. Caroline's eyes were open now, and they met his. She turned back to the nurse, gesturing toward him, obviously agitated. The nurse left the room and approached Toby. Are you Toby Nash? Yes, ma'am, he answered. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave. His face paled. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I cannot have you upsetting the patient. She doesn't want you here. Please leave, or do I need to call for security? No, no, of course not. His voice was thick with emotion. His lips trembled as he looked at Caroline through the glass one more time. He turned and looked from face to face at the people who were there for her. Toby nodded at Eugene and Madame Pierre. Whatever she needs, she gets. Money is no object. You understand that, don't you? Madame placed her hand on his shoulder. I understand, handsome man. Do not worry. She will get better, and she'll come around. I'm sure of it. He didn't dare speak again. He merely nodded his head and turned to leave. Inside his car, inside his car, Toby leaned his head against the steering wheel. He didn't think he could ever hurt this bad. She was life to him, and even after he'd told her the entire truth, she still didn't want him. He'd lost her. In 1 month's time, he found the only woman he'd ever loved, experienced the most happiness he'd ever experienced, and felt more pain than he'd ever thought possible. Why wouldn't she listen to him? Why can't she see reason? She'd told him why, hadn't she? She said her mother had loved her and hurt her, her father too. She didn't know about love, she didn't trust it, and now she didn't trust him. He blew out a breath. This was all his fault in so many ways. Not just his lack of control that day on the horse, but his turning his back on his religion. He'd already admitted to Caroline that he wasn't living like a true believer, and if he'd been, he wouldn't have had a relationship with Tracy or a number of others. And Tracy wouldn't have been able to say that she was pregnant, and he would have honored his father and mother when they objected to his ways. And now Caroline suffered because of him. There was no way he could just turn his back. He had to make things right. No way would he give up this easily. No way would he let her throw away what they had. He would wait for her to get well and give her some alone time. Rehearsals for the Nashville July 4th celebration were scheduled to begin soon, and he would totally focus on that, keep his mind on business, and give Caroline time to consider all he told her. And he would pray, really pray, not for himself, but pray for her healing, both physically and emotionally. New scene. Within 24 hours, Caroline had responded so well to the antibiotics she was moved to her own room. By the end of the week, she was released. She went about her life as she had before, only the contentment was gone. She went back to work at the diner, and Rosie decided to stay on and moved to mid-shift. Caroline rarely smiled, seldom spoke. She had to force herself to speak with the customers simply to avoid hurting Eugene's business. It was much more difficult to teach her dance students. There was nothing inside her heart to give. She dropped her night dance classes. She lost the joy they gave. She was only glad about one thing. She hadn't run into George since she'd returned from Tennessee. Even though her days were joyless, the nights were worse. Dreams of Toby ran through her mind when she was awake and through her dreams when she slept. As if someone had died, she forced herself to focus on eating and dressing and working and simply breathing. You don't have to feel this way, Rosie insisted one day. He loves you. He wants to be back in your life. Caroline didn't answer her because she loved him and wanted him back too. If she was truly honest with herself, she had to admit that. So why couldn't she? What was she so afraid of? She was afraid of being knocked in the head with the phone receiver. Madame Pierre called her to ask about her decision to teach for her school. Caroline told her she was very close to accepting. Eugene didn't really need her at the diner anymore, not with Rosie there. Caroline just needed a little more time to think. Not that there was anything to think about. Why wouldn't she accept such a lucrative offer? It's just that she was having such a difficult time making decisions lately. She was pondering this particular issue while at the park one hot summer afternoon as she sat on the swing, rocking back and forth, her feet drawing circles in the sand. Hello, Caroline. Her head jerked up, and Toby stepped back immediately, trying not to scare her away, but she stood, obviously intending to turn tail. Please wait, Caroline, please. Just talk. Just for a minute. She stopped and looked up at him. His strength drew her, touched her at her innermost being. With Toby standing right in front of her, it was hard to deny how much she'd missed him. Nodding, she sat back down on the swing. Um, how are you feeling? He asked. I'm much better, thank you. Good, that's good. Silence. The conversation reminded him of their first one all those years ago. Um, how are your classes going? I quit. Surprised by that, he stared at her, waiting for an explanation. She shrugged. There's no joy in it anymore. I'm sorry to hear that. The stab she'd intended for his heart hit home. The swing creaked as it swayed back and forth, and Caroline, avoiding eye contact, looked down at her feet. Uh, Thunder told me to tell you hello. She lifted her gaze. Oh, really? Yes, and Rascal says he misses you too. I see, she said, not able to stop a tiny smile. You miss them too. I can see it in your eyes. Her smile disappeared and she stood abruptly. Don't tell me what I feel. He backed off. Sorry. Don't leave, please. Conceding, she walked slowly down toward the small lake and sat on a bench, watching children feed the ducks. Toby purchased a bag of popcorn from a vendor and brought it to her, and when she raised a questioning brow at him, he shrugged. It's for the ducks. She tossed some their way, and immediately the entire flock left the children who'd been feeding them and waddled over to get their share of popcorn. Caroline felt bad about stealing the ducks from the kids and motioned for one of them to take the bag from her. She watched with a smile as the ducks surrounded the kids again. Caroline and Toby made their escape up the hill and onto the path that surrounded the park. So, what are you doing back in New York? She finally asked. I came to see you. No other business? Is that so hard to believe? She only shrugged. I had to come and see if you would talk to me about what happened, if you would give me a chance to explain. She was silent for several moments. You hurt me, she began. I didn't, he dared to argue. Tracy did. She meant to. It was calculated, and it worked. Silence again while she considered his words. He'd been about to ask her to marry him, and that is not a hurtful thing. It had been Tracy who did the hurting. Caroline had fallen for Tracy's lies, if they really were lies. How do I know what you say is the truth? Toby's heart skipped a beat. It sounded as if she was at least taking things into consideration. I don't know how to convince you. I'm telling you the truth. Follow your heart, Caroline. It will tell what is true. Her head snapped around. My heart tells me that loving someone is dangerous and that I'm safer on my own where there is no one can hurt or lie or hit. Well, now that had been the wrong answer, Toby thought. He better come up with a better one. So he stopped and leaned against a tree and took a deep breath. There's a hymn I remember from church, Caroline, that I always loved. It goes, no man is an island, no man stands alone. I don't think we're meant to go through life alone, not loving, for fear of being hurt. We can't live in fear. I'll tell you, Caroline, if I were afraid of being hurt, I sure wouldn't be here now because you hurt me, Caroline, worse than I ever thought anyone could. She looked up into his face. I hurt you? He nodded. The day you sent me away from the hospital was the most devastating time in my life. She truly hadn't meant to hurt him. She wouldn't hurt anyone if she could help it. I was in so much pain, I just couldn't think about anything else. I wasn't in my right mind. I was so confused, Toby. I'm sorry that sending you away hurt you. That wasn't my intention. He smiled. The simple words healed the wound immediately. Well, that is so good to know. She smiled up at him, and just like the very first day they'd met, it took his breath away. Caroline was also thinking about those first days together. She wasn't ready to jump right back in yet, but she decided she could test the waters a little. So, Thunder misses me. He grinned. And Rascal, too. Anyone else? She prodded. His smile faded. And me. I miss you, Caroline. My whole being yearns for you every minute of every day. She turned to him. Is that so? She asked, trying to sound flippant, though how could she when she was being drawn to him like a giant magnet? Her body was being pulled toward his. She tried to fight it. Leaning forward, she placed her hand against his chest to push away. Really, she'd meant to push away, but instead she was being drawn closer and closer. That's so, he whispered against her ear. His hands were on her face, his thumbs lifting her chin, then skimming over her lips. I want to kiss you, he begged, his voice rough. I won't if you don't want me to, but Lord, please tell me yes. One kiss, just one. Say yes, Caroline. There was that rushing sound in her head again, the one she had whenever she was about to do something that took courage. Yes, she whispered. He wasted no time. He pressed his lips to hers. Her kiss was the sweetest nectar, water for a dying man, food for the starving. He'd been doing both. He'd promised just one kiss and wanted to break his word immediately, but he wouldn't, not when it might put everything at risk. He stepped back. I have to leave New York tomorrow. She was looking at him. He couldn't tell what she was thinking, couldn't tell if she even cared. I've been working on a big July 4th thing, he explained. I have to get back. She nodded her head. It's probably for the best. What's for the best? You having to leave. He frowned and took a deep breath, trying to control his frustration. What would it take? What is it going to take to get her back in his life? She seems to understand what happened with Tracy, so why does she keep punishing me? He simply didn't know what else to do, what else to say. Maybe they needed to start completely over. Well, they couldn't do that if she wouldn't even see him. He had to get her to see him. Drawing a deep breath, he ventured onward. Would you would you like to celebrate the 4th in Nashville? Before she could refuse, he hurried on. It's going to be a huge country festival sort of thing. Some of the biggest names are going to be there. She smiled. You included? Well, I said the biggest, he joked. But her smile weakened. I don't think so, Toby. Caroline, we need some time together. Look, there's no pressure. You don't have to come out to the farm. You can stay in Nashville. I swear I won't talk to you about anything except the weather if you don't want me to. Just spend some time with me. She was shaking her head. No, I don't think it's a good idea. He could feel the frustration and the anger rising. He was tired of begging. What do you want from me? Do you like seeing me like this? I'm a broken man, Caroline. You broke me. You're destroying me. What do you want? What will it take? Why won't you listen to reason? She got angry right back. I don't know. I don't know what I want. I don't know what it will take. Everything seems so confusing and easy. It seems too easy for you. No matter what happens, you send a few flowers and write a few poems, sing a few songs, and you think it will make everything all better. He ran a hand through his hair. It's not like that, Caroline. That's not fair. I've suffered. I am suffering. She shook her head. Oh, Toby, that's not what I want. I don't want you to suffer. I don't know what it is I want. I guess I want to be sure of love, of your love. And I don't know how to do that. How can I be sure? You can't. The honesty of his answer surprised both of them. I wish I could tell you what you need to know, Caroline, but I can't. No one can be sure from one day to the next what will happen, what will change. He drew a deep breath and took her hand. I do know that you can't live in fear, and you can't hide away, afraid to love for fear of getting hurt. I'm not sure that I know what true love is any more than you. I mean, Jesus taught love. That was his main thing, love. They say that the greatest gift we can give is to give our life for someone. And that's what he did. Well, I want you to know that I would give mine for you, Princess, in a second. I would run into a burning building to save you, throw myself in front of a bullet. I would even. He hesitated, not sure if he should say what he was about to say. He decided to go with it. I would even stay out of your life if I thought it would be the best for you. But it wouldn't, Caroline, because the best for you is me, and the best for me is you. Look, you don't have to marry me. You don't have to see me next month. Just spend the 4th of July with me. That's all. We'll take it one day at a time. She looked down at her hands while she thought and then looked back up. I don't want to fly. His heart leapt. Well, then I'll drive you. I'll pick you up a few days early and we'll drive. When we stop for the night, you'll have your own room, no pressure, just time together. She smiled. One day at a time, right? Absolutely. She drew a deep breath and nodded. Well, then, it's a date. July 2nd, early? She nodded. Yes. How early? It'd be good to get on the road early. How about 5? Okay. He felt like running and yelling and laughing for joy, but he calmed himself and simply smiled instead. They walked silently toward her apartment where his car was parked, and Toby gazed up at the ugly building. Has Mancini given you any more trouble? I haven't seen him since I've been back. I think he's afraid to show his face when I'm around. Toby nodded. Good. Seems he took my warning seriously. He was watching her face and she smiled up at him. She was so beautiful. There was nothing there was something about those big brown eyes with her blonde hair and that smile. It lit up her face and it reminded him of a video of a flower blooming in time lapse. When Caroline wasn't smiling, it was like a closed bud, but then she smiles and the flower opens in beautiful, breathtaking, radiant hues. It was amazing. Well, she said softly, goodbye for now. He took her hand. He wouldn't dare press for another kiss. Goodbye, Princess. He brushed his lips across her hand. She stood on the sidewalk studying him as he got into his car and drove away. She realized she didn't think of him as a celebrity. He didn't present himself that way. He was down to earth and humble. He'd worn jeans, a pullover shirt, and athletic shoes that were old and scuffed. He had at least a 2-day growth of beard. She remembered the kiss and sighed, the softness of his lips, the hardness of his body, the clean, masculine smell that was him, even the feel of his calloused fingers as they touched her face. She would hold on to those memories until Independence Day. She found she was looking forward to that day with great anticipation. Caro, Caro, come here. Irene was calling her from the doorway of the diner, waving her arms and jumping up and down. She was grinning from ear to ear, making Caroline smile as she ran across the street to see what all the commotion was about. What in the world is going on? Carol asked. Come in here, girl. You got to hear this. Irene grabbed Carol's arm and ushered her in. Rosie and Eugene stood arm in arm, grinning at each other. They turned as Caroline approached. Well, Caroline prodded. Rosie is off the streets for good, Alice announced. We're getting married, Caro, Rosie beamed. Married? You and Eugene? Yes, me and Eugene, Rosie laughed. Caroline smiled with pleasure. Oh, Rosie, I'm so happy for you. And you, Eugene, oh my, I just can't believe it. She hugged Rosie hard and reached up to kiss Eugene's cheek. When did all this happen? Oh, it's been happening for a long time, Irene said, but Rosie kept holding him off, something about not being good enough for Eugene. Caroline frowned at Rosie, who only shrugged with a smile. Eugene finally spoke. I convinced her that life is too short to waste any more time. So have you set a date? Carol asked. Today. We're really not going to waste another minute, Rosie declared. But don't you have to have blood tests and a marriage license? Carol asked. All that's been taken care of. We'll be closing down the diner for a week to go on a short honeymoon, Eugene added. Where are you going? Alice asked. Well, Niagara Falls, of course. Well, since the diner's going to be closed, I suppose now is as good a time as any to tell you that I've decided to work full time for Madame Pierre, Caroline announced. Well, good for you, girl, Irene said with a nod as Caroline accepted everyone's congratulations. Well, the practical Alice prompted, let's get this show on the road. The entire group, plus a few of Eugene's friends, attended the short ceremony at the office of one of the district magistrates and returned to the diner for a giant celebration. Caroline and the girls decorated with flowers and crepe paper and cooked up a storm, and they played loud music, and before the evening ended, the entire neighborhood had involved themselves in wishing the new couple all the happiness in the world. Caroline, as usual, worked hard behind the counter, waiting on everyone, making sure all enjoyed themselves. Yet there was an emptiness inside her. She wished Toby could be there to help celebrate. He was the one who had pointed out to her that Rosie and Eugene were an item. More than that, though, she realized, she was wishing the celebration was for her and Toby, too. She sighed. Maybe Eugene is right, she thought. Life is too short to waste. Maybe she should go for it. Maybe she'll get hurt, and maybe she won't. It would be better than going through life alone and sad, like her mother. She decided right then and there that when Toby arrives on July 2nd, he'll find her very receptive. And that is the end of chapter 8.